And so, thank you for joining, and I would like to jump right into the conversation. So, my first one is for you, Jeron, and also Steph, about your about Unanimous, which is your company that you're working on together, and this is a sort of debut project. And if you could walk us through the objectives of the company and its origins and some of your mission.
Yeah, so my background is brand strategy, and when Stephen and I, when we first started working together, kind of that foundation, where you start is with kind of who you are, what you want to represent, what you stand for, and the impact you want to leave on the world. And I was trying to dive into some of those questions and some of those topical areas with Stephen, and his answers really centered around one foundational theme, which was inspiration. And you know, he wanted to use his platform to really inspire the world. And when the opportunity in media and film and television came around, and brought it to Stephen and talked to him about the kind of the greater opportunity, the thought was that there is no more impactful way to inspire the world than through the sharing and the dissemination of content around the globe. And it seemed like a foregone conclusion that getting into the film and television space was the right move for us.
You know, on top of that, just I feel like I have a very strong foundation, understand really who I am and how different I am amongst, I guess, peers and things that make me who I am. And for me to bring those pillars into life through this media space in terms of the family, my faith, and obviously the world of sports. And so we try to find projects and stories that are inspiring, one, but two, fall in one of those categories that are truly authentic to me. And I think we've done a solid job of that so far, and obviously aligning with people that are great storytellers that have an eye for, you know, for that field, and doing it in a very, very big way and uplifting people that need to be uplifted. So that's kind of how we got into it.
Congratulations, and this is the first big project, and from what I understand, people will have a chance to see it in certain locations on a certain date.
Yeah, Ivy, you want to make that official announcement?
Yeah, so we are actually planning to release the film for the first time on the day that it happened, June 17th. We'll be releasing it in theaters across America, beginning on that day.
So the film is really hard to watch, and part of me wanted to start this conversation by saying I hate that it needs to exist, right? Like, I hate that this happened and we need to watch something like that. So as we move into the conversation about the film, you know, the United States has a deep legacy of racial trauma and pain and suffering going back centuries. And I wanted to know why you guys decided to focus on this particular instance. Obviously, it's close to home, but I want to hear you sort of share that with us.
Like you said, I think it's a truly heartbreaking story. It's one that was well known across the country, across the world, and another incidence of senseless tragedy in terms of gun violence, in terms of racial profiling, racism in general. And so I think the biggest thing, we talk about some of the themes in the movie, but the biggest thing that came out was how faith and forgiveness permeated the family's response to this tragedy. And for me specifically, it's so hard to try to put yourself in their shoes or to empathize with what they're going through, but it's so inspiring the way that they handled it. Obviously there's so many ways that could have gone down. There's so many ways that they could have used the cameras in their face, and asking them these questions. How do they want to celebrate their family members? How do they want to move forward and deal with the tragedy? And they chose forgiveness. They chose faith. And they chose to support each other and the community coming around them. And so that alone speaks volumes for humanity and the hope in humanity. that community in Charleston, the community around Emanuel, they did an amazing job with that. So we wanted to be able to tell that story to the masses, that hopefully that gives hope to whatever you're going through. This is the highest of tragedies, but anything that you're going through in life, it should spread love, spread positivity, spread forgiveness and faith, and those things can help you out.
I guess my earliest memory of church is probably being about 4 years old. Non-denominational Christian church. The film was tough, right? I think I like to refer to it as the duality of faith, right? On one hand, there are a myriad of families that forgave Dylan for that tragic act. Their family members murdered, and I don't think there's any other way to look at that forgiveness than as an illustration of the power of God. Conversely, I also understand and can recognize the other side or the flip side of that coin, and the thought that Christianity has been historically used to keep the oppressed docile, subservient, and non-violent to their oppressor. And you know, I think some of the families chose not to forgive, but I think regardless of what side of that response you agree with, I think it's pretty pertinent to recognize that that act of forgiveness was powerful. It was inspiring, and I think it provides a measure of hope.
I grew up in church, and I remember one of my earlier memories is going to Sunday school and Miss Taylor, and how you couldn't, like, one of the worst things you can do in church was disrespect the elders. And I think that's one of the things that makes this film really hard too, is seeing those elders in church talking about how faith has affected their lives. Steph and Brian, do you guys have early memories in going to church?
Oh, for sure. I think one of my earliest memories is in Radford, Virginia, where my mom grew up. There's a church, New Mount Olive, right across the street, and it's the neighborhood church. And I remember as a kid, kind of like you talked about with the elders and the familiarity of that Sunday, and just the sights and sounds and the views and the music and the vibe. It was kind of ingrained in me early in terms of what that could mean and tapping into that. When I actually gave my life to Christ in middle school in Charlotte, it was a Church of God in Charlotte, led by a white pastor, Pastor Livingston, but the congregation was fairly mixed, and so from that standpoint, it was never a question. Going to church was about, you know, just the community and love and worshiping God, and so I was blessed to grow up with that foundation, you know, and that being a huge part of my life growing up, so that it kind of set me on my way as I went into the world.
We have this foundation, Sonia Curry in the building. Everybody give Sonia Curry a round of applause.
So, I didn't grow up in church. I hated church. I hated Christianity in particular, I think. The first time I interacted with faith in a serious way was when I joined a gospel choir in college. I was definitely the only white dude, and that really started to change my perception. But I actually came to Christ when I was 22. So I think this journey for me was about just being honest about what I didn't understand about the church, and in particular the African American church, trying to surround myself with people who did understand, so that the film could be reverent and respectful and an accurate depiction of a place that is the heartbeat, remains the heartbeat of that community.
So this question is for all three of you. I want to take you back to 2015. Where were you when this incident happened? How did you find out about it? Who told you? Where did you read about it? Was it on Twitter? Or was it on television?
I was in the Bay Area. I don't know exactly where. I can't remember exactly where I was, but there was a situation where I was on social media and you get one of those breaking news alerts or whatnot. And,
From the New York Times.
in terms of you know, what's going on. And to be honest, how often this happens in our country is way too much. You almost get numb to it. And it's like, you know, this is the kind of the who, what, where, and you don't want to have that initial reaction because it's such a traumatic thing for these families that they're going through. But in terms of like, again, how often and frequent it is, it just makes you angry. And again, for me, growing up in North Carolina, you know, having spent time in Charleston, understanding this, you know, the kind of lay of the land down there, it was definitely heartbreaking. And then you follow the events from there, and a lot of that was depicted in the film in terms of you know, the initial hearing where, you know, family members are speaking up as they see Dylan for the first time. President Obama in his moment, you know, giving the eulogy and those type of things, and that's where the hope and the faith starts to creep back in. And so those are really powerful moments, but. And again, why this story is so impactful, I think, you know, even 4 years later.
I was on my honeymoon, and I remember I was standing on the balcony, and I was looking at, of course, a beautiful sunrise, and I walk into the bedroom, my wife's in there, and she's just weeping, and I'm thinking, like, what did I do? I didn't think it was that bad. So, you know, is this being taped? I'm so sorry. So I'm seeing her and she has her laptop out. And of course we've been off the grid entirely being on our honeymoon. And I just said, what's going on? You okay? And she said, 9 people got shot in their Bible study. I said, what are you talking about? Of course that's a place we were both very familiar with. And I said, are you okay? Are you okay? And she says, no, you don't understand. They're forgiving him. They're forgiving the guy who killed them. And I remember looking at my wife in that moment, and I remember saying, man, whoever tells this story better not skip that part. I had no idea that I'd ever be a part of it.
I should have went first. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I saw it on Instagram first. And when I started to read about it, I said, we had seen a myriad of tragedies, and I was like, this guy's gotta go to jail for this one. I'm like, this one seems pretty plain and clear. But more than the tragedy, I remember President Obama's response to it. Ironically, at the time, I was contemplating changing my whole career and going to work at the White House. I was going, they had just told me how much I was going to be paid, and I was like, I don't know about this job. But seeing the way the president responded to the tragedy told me without a doubt, like, that's something I wanted to be a part of. So that's how I heard about the tragedy.
So, forgiveness, round of applause. Forgiveness is a huge theme in this film, and we've talked about it already quite a bit. But I also remember the week after, and I remember the victims forgiving, and I also remember my reaction being, this cannot be. And I remember specifically an op-ed that was written by Roxanne Gay, and I just wanted to read the first couple sentences. I do not forgive Dylan Roof, a racist terrorist whose name I hate saying or knowing. I have no immediate connection to what happened in Charleston last week beyond my humanity and my blackness, but I do not foresee ever forgiving his crimes, and I am wholly at ease with that choice. And, you know, they talk about in the film, through that act of forgiveness, there was, you know, mobilizing that couldn't be done. There was truth-telling that couldn't be done. Did you have a moment where you kind of needed to take a pause and say, you know, if we didn't skip right to the forgiveness part, we could have done some work of, you know, racial reconciliation, or just recognizing that the horrifying nature of what happened?
For sure. Forgiveness is a problematic idea societally, right? Like being forgiving of racism in general. Person to person, it tends to be a little different. I think the families are certainly all over the map as far as where they fall on that. And I think forgiveness was something that white America adopted very quickly for the same reason we always do, which is so we don't have to deal with the reality that we had a 400-year head start, among other things. And that non-white privilege, I'm woke enough to realize, comes from a legacy of white supremacy. So I think that was a huge problem. But for the families on an individual basis, I think it meant something different than forgiving racism. I think it was saying to this individual person, which is what inspired me the most. As you notice, Felicia Sanders doesn't actually say, I forgive you. She says, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you. And I think that was a statement not only of personal freedom to say that I am free from being your emotional prisoner. It's often said that unforgiveness is drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. And I think Felicia set herself free, but she also loved Dylan Roof in that moment, saying that I recognize your humanity and I long for your redemption, which is something that I am personally very inspired by and I long to emulate in my own life.
I want to hear more about the process of making the film. Who did the interviews?
Great question. So my good friend, producing partner, Demos Salaberios, who's here tonight.
Where's Demos?
Oh, he's backstage. 6'6" from the Bronx. Where are you, D? Come on, man. Say hello. So for me, it was important to me that with the families in particular that Demos did the interview. Something I learned from this process early on is that it's very hard for a white person to grieve properly with a black person. And I think it's awkward and it's inappropriate. I think there's something I'll never understand. And I accepted that, and so Demos was the one who really had the courage to sit in those rooms, and I was the one in charge of the camera, making sure it looked right and everything. But a lot of the other interviews I did conduct with a lot of the white people in the film, but also with a lot, but together we were able to handle it. And I think the families felt honored and cared for in that process. So.
I think Unanimous had just landed on Sony when we met Brian, and he came in and told us what he was trying to do with the project. And I think, one, he told us his whole story, which was incredibly inspiring. If we had another hour, that'd be a great thing to listen to. But after he told us the story, he told us about the families, and that this film was about the families, it was about raising money for the families. And we've always considered ourselves, Unanimous Media, a purpose over profit company. Profit's important, but nothing's more pertinent than purpose. And when he told us what he was trying to do, we immediately we had to get Steph on the phone right away. And obviously Steph being from the Carolinas, hearing the stories about the families, hearing what the goal was for this film. I think even furthermore, what Unanimous stands for as a company. I think my partner, Eric Payton's sitting out there. Wave for him. Wave to him, Eric. There. I don't think we could have dreamed of a better film, a better project that represented what we wanted to stand for as a company than this film. So it was a foregone conclusion.
Continuing the subject of forgiveness, I wanted you guys to tell us whether or not you believe in the death penalty.
What are you trying to curveball? So, I think that's an interesting question. And, okay, so, I think I understand the rationale behind the death penalty, right? And the purpose it serves. But I think personally, I would be in favor of finding other methods, other avenues, and other ways of redeeming and rehabilitating an individual.
Along those lines, I wouldn't say I don't believe in the death penalty. I feel like there are situations where an individual can be redeemed or be healed and mentally, physically, whatever the issue is at root of why they're in that situation. They do not need to be a threat to society at all. And that needs to be taken care of first and foremost. And I understand there are other implications of what that means for a life sentence and long-term care for that. But just in terms of what I believe in humanity and the redeeming qualities of my Lord and Savior and what that means for somebody going through the worst of the worst, nothing is impossible for that. So I think that can live out through not putting somebody to death because of
I think, of course, does Dylan Roof deserve to die for what he did? Yeah, for sure. But I think that's never what people aren't saying when they forgive him. They are saying, in spite of that, we still love you. So, do I think people deserve it? Yes, but would I say I believe in it and think it solves the problem? No. And I do think we fail way before they get to the Bible study with the gun, a lot of times. And there are things we can do before that even becomes a conversation we have to have. So, that's where I live.
Another thing that struck me while watching the film was how difficult it must be to relive that trauma and have it filmed. So can you share with us how you prepared for that or how you prepared the victims to share their story so vividly?
For sure. I mean, I think for us, no one was a means to an end. So what we did contractually with each person we interviewed was we said that any money we make as producers, we want to give back to you as a gift. And we're willing to put that into the contract before you sign it. And so I think that gave them a level of trust in who we were and what we stood for, that they were willing to sit in a room with us. And we also always met them without any equipment to make sure they understood we were here only by their permission and blessing, not because we wanted to just make a movie or something. I think the healthiest question for every documentarian to ask themselves is, should I make this? Or should I tell the story? We certainly ask that question of the families and of ourselves.
Steph, what is the most powerful moment in the film for you?
I mean, there are so many to choose from, obviously, in terms of every family's take on what they went through, the way that they tell their story, the passion behind it, how they celebrate their family members. The two that stick out to me the most, just because I think I can, if there's any way I can relate to what the mindset that he was going through, was Chris Singleton, as a young athlete who's, I think he's spirit-led in what he's doing. He thinks he has a higher purpose and knows he has a higher purpose, and a God-given ability to play baseball, and that's what he's wrapping his mind into. And that he finds motivation through a verse that he writes on his wrist, and that keeps him going every day. He thinks it's for a certain reason. And like he talked about, when his mother passes and is taken away from him, that verse takes an entirely new meaning for him. In the face of adversity, in the face of tragedy, how can I get through it? And I try to picture myself, like, would I have the awareness to respond that way? Would I have the maturity and the courage to say, and the strength to say, you know what, this isn't gonna defeat me. It's a terrible situation. He loves his mother. It's not gonna defeat him. And he finds that inspiration through something that was in his life already, but he kind of redirects that. And that was a powerful moment for me in terms of seeing him in the gym doing an interview so soon after his mother passed, and taking on the forgiving qualities that were empowering to him, and an example to his sisters there, and the rest of the people that knew him. And then again, President Obama, in terms of the Amazing Grace, the community in the church, everybody was watching that. It was just a communal experience that I think gave so much hope, and still you could see on his face the depth of that moment, and I think that was extremely powerful.
Trying to say, let's talk about sports and the country being divided at the moment, and how one rationale for people who feel sports should not be political or should not be a space for politics is that because the country is so divided, sports is supposed to be entertainment. What do you say to those people who feel politics should be left out of sports?
Athletes in general, especially in the NBA, guys are educated, they know what they're talking about, they're passionate about what they believe, and there's a reason that you say something and there's a headline. People want to hear what we have to say, so we shouldn't shy away from it. As it is a game, it's a sport, it's for fun. There are millions and millions and millions of people that watch, and that platform is extremely powerful if used in the right way. And we have a league that supports each other. We have a commissioner that supports us in using our voice and speaking for those that can't speak for themselves. And I think this era of athlete is unafraid to be unapologetically themselves, no matter what that means. And so I'm blessed to be able to play in this league. I'm blessed to have the support that we do. I'm blessed to have the platform that I do. And I will continue to use that until I don't have it anymore.
Jeron, I wanted to talk to you about your personal experience with racism. Can you share maybe the first time that you encountered racism?
I don't know if I can remember the first time, but I can tell you about the most memorable time. Probably about 20 years old. I just got finished done at probably like, I don't know if it was Target or one of those stores. And I was taking a phone call in my car. And this phone call started to go long. And so I'm just kind of sitting in the car on my phone, and there's not many cars in the parking lot. And an officer kind of came up behind my car. I was like, oh, here we go. So, get off the phone and put my phone down. And the officer comes up, put down my window, and he's like asking me why I'm like in that parking lot. I'm like, just talking on the phone. So he goes, let me see your license and registration. Like no problem. License and registration was on the floor of my car. So I go to reach down for my license, head down like this, and then I hear him start cursing at me and yelling at me. And I'm like, why? What did I do? I slowly move my head up. He had his gun drawn, and his gun was to my head, sitting right outside the window. I was like, what did I do? What did I do? He was like, what are you reaching for? I'm like, you were asking for my license and registration. Do what you told me to do. And it was a tough situation for two reasons. One, never owned a gun in my life, right? So, your parents train you, your parents give you the very poignant lessons about dealing with those types of situations, but that was the first time I was in that type of situation. Once again, as someone who's never owned a firearm, I'm not thinking that this officer is gonna think I have a firearm. I'm reaching for a firearm. I think the scariest thing to me was that his hand was shaking as he held his gun in my head. So he was nervous. He was scared. It's like, and I understood that he was scared of me. He didn't know me. I think the most interesting thing about this scenario is when the situation de-escalated. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the officer, and he was real honest with me. He was just like, one, he told me he was scared. Two, he told me he thought I was reaching for a gun, and he said, and then three, he told me he could have taken my life. He told me he could have taken my life. I'm like, I would have lost my life for no reason. And I think the hardest thing about the situation is that this officer wasn't a bad guy. Like after talking to him, I'm like, I've dealt with very difficult law enforcement, but truth be told, he wasn't one of them. Sadly, he was just scared, and it changed my perspective. And it's ironic to think that in a situation where my life could have been taken from me at 20 years old was actually the situation that would give me more perspective on law enforcement in general.
The reason why I asked that question is because of what you just mentioned with the talk, parents having the talk with their children. And Steph, I know you have children. How do you prepare them for a world, a reality where something like what happens in this documentary happens? What is the talk?
I think it starts with just making sure they are aware and educated and prepared for what's happened already, what potentially could happen in the situation they're in. My parents did an amazing job. I'm obviously blessed to come from a strong foundation where they provided a certain life where I didn't necessarily have to deal with face-to-face, racism in terms of uncomfortable situations, things like that. But in terms of what they went through, what their parents went through, I knew all about that, and they were clear to make sure to tell me. One, I'm blessed to be, grow up the way that I did, but in terms of, this is real. This is stuff that people go through on a daily basis, and that I need to be, have that compassionate, loving, and caring attitude in terms of an awareness of what's going on. And so I would equip my kids with the same preparation. The same love, I can't necessarily show them what that means, but I can hopefully live that out. Me and my wife can on a daily basis. And prepare them and equip them with the necessary tools to be unapologetically them first and foremost. But not be naive and understand that this world is crazy. And they live in a crazy world, so to be prepared for anything, really.
Brian,